So I have created our BirdScript and I have placed it under scripts and then BirdScript folder, and I have attached it on our Flappy Bird. So if we select our bird here and go in the inspector panel, we will see that we have that script attached to our bird. And remember, when you attach something or change something, you need to press this apply here so that that will apply on the prefab that we saved. But before we script our bird flapping, we need to create a button. And for that we will go under Game Object, UI, and then select a button. When we select this button, we also get a canvas with it, and we also get this event system. Now we will select the canvas, and even though we still did not explain the new UI and we did not talk about canvas, we will do that a little bit later, but for now just follow along. So select this canvas and go here where it says canvas in the inspector panel, and instead of screen space overlay, you will select screen space camera and simply attach the main camera to it. So here you will go and attach the main camera. And now what we will do is we will take this button and we will simply set it to be at 0, 0, but we still don't see it. That's because we need to select our canvas and go here in the sorting layer and set it on canvas. So now we can see our button. Now we will simply select our button, and under it we have a text component. We will delete that text component and rename our button to flap button and set its tag to be flap button, which we created here. And now we will simply resize our button to something like this. Well, basically not the whole screen, but well, more than half of the screen. At the moment we don't see our bird because our button is covering it, and for that we can select our button and go here under inspector panel where it says image, and for the color, so simply select here and set the alpha channel to 0, which will make our button transparent, but we can still touch it and perform touch events. Now while we are doing this, like this basically, we don't want to use input.get mouse button down to register a touch on the screen. For that we are going to use this button, so each time our user touches here on the button, our bird is going to flap. And one other thing that we need to do is select our button and go here under Rect Transform, and here for the anchor simply click on it and set it here, this at the bottom right corner, to be stretched so that it will stretch with the screen size and it will support multiple screen resolutions. Now we can simply click on our BirdScript and it will open here in MonoDevelop. Before we start scripting, we need a couple of variables. The first one will be public static BirdScript, and I will name it instance. Now what this means? Well, we know what a static variable is, and we are going to make our script a static instance, or we are going to create an instance of it that's going to be static so that we can use, the name of the script dot instance to access each of the public methods and each of the public variables that we declare in this script, so that we don't need to get a reference in other scripts. We don't need to get a reference of the BirdScript in other scripts to access those, functions and variables that we declare here. Next, we need the reference to the rigid body. So here I will say private rigid body 2D, and I will name it my rigid body. We also need, a reference to the animator because we want to play our animation. So here we'll say private animator. So let me just type it right, and I will just name it anim. And we need two private float variables. So here it will be private float. One is going to be forward speed, so it will be forward speed, and the second one will be, so I will just copy and paste this one here. So the second will be bounce speed, so it will be bounce speed like this. Now we are going to use the rigid body in order to bounce our bird. And there are two ways how can we get this component. Now I will show you the less efficient and the more efficient way. The less efficient way is that we can use the awake function, so it will be awake, and inside of this function we will simply say my rigid body is equal to, and here we are going to say get component, and here we are going to type the rigid body 2D like this. And if we go in our inspector panel and select our bird, using the get component, it will get this component right here. So the rigid body, so this that we have here, it will get it and it will store it here in this rigid body variable. And this is the less efficient way. Of course, here if we are using only get component once, this will not affect our game. But if we are using it thousands of times, then it will affect the speed of our game. And the second and most efficient way is that we can simply type above our, well, declared variable, in our case, rigid body. Here we can simply say serialized field, and we can now go back in the inspector, and we will see now in the script we have this reference to that rigid body. We can simply drag that bird here in the inspector panel, and it will have the reference to this rigid body. And we can do this because, well, our bird has this rigid body component attached to it. So this is the more efficient way how can we do it. And we can simply copy and paste this here and do the same thing for our animator, because here we have our animator and we need a reference to it. So we can simply drag our bird here in the inspector panel and also hit apply so that this applies to our prefab that we saved. Of course, using the get component function that we typed earlier, so we can type get component, we can get any component that's attached on our game object. So here we can also type animator and we can get the animator. And if we go back here in our Unity editor and select our game object, any game component, any component that's attached to our game object. So here we have our transform, sprite render, animator, circle collider, even the script. So we can get it by using this get component. So here we can type, for example, BirdScript, and this will get us the BirdScript that's attached on that game object. But as I said, this is a little bit efficient, or more efficient, that we can use, and it's better to use. But I would just, well, wanted to let you know that you can get other components using this get component. And our forward speed will initially be equal to 3, and our bounce speed will initially be equal to 4. We can also use this serialized field above our variables here. So if I type it like this and go back in the inspector panel, our variable will be visible here in the inspector panel, and we can manipulate it here and we can set the value here. So let's say, for example, 3. So this is just, well, to let you know, because we add our or set our variables to be private, and that way they cannot be accessed outside of this script. But if you want to access them and manipulate them in the editor here, then you can simply type, well, this serialized field above the variable, and it will be visible in the inspector panel, and then you can manipulate it. Now we will create an instance out of our class, and we do it like this. In the awake function, we are going to type if instance is equal to null, meaning we don't have an instance. So we don't have a script pointing to this instance. Here we are going to say instance is equal to this, meaning that now our class here is the instance. And here I need to add 2 more variables. One will be a private variable, so it will be private bool did flap, and the second one will be a public bool. So public bool is alive, so that we can program the movement and the flapping of our bird. Now in the update function here, and we are going to change it to fixed update, and the difference between the two is that the update function is called every frame, but the fixed update is called every 2 or 3 frames. So the first thing that we are going to do here is we are going to check if our bird is alive, meaning that we can move and we can bounce. If we die, then we cannot move or cannot bounce. So the first thing that we are going to do here is create a vector tree, and it will be a temp for the temporary position, and it will be transform that position. This transform that position will get us the current position of our bird. And here we want to say temp.x plus equals, meaning we are assigning the value of, and here we are going to say forward speed times time.delta time. Now this time.delta time is a very small number used in the fixed update or the update function when we want to perform these types of calculations, so moving the player, well, slowly or stuff like that. And we are going to use our forward speed, which we have declared here, and we are going to move our bird to the right side, meaning, well, to the front or upwards, because this is a 2D game. And now we need to say transform that position is equal to our temp, or reassigning our position back to our current position or the position of that bird, and this will move the bird in front basically. Next, we are going to check if we did flap. So here we're going to say if did flap, meaning our bird needs to flap. The first thing that we are going to do here is we are going to say did flap is equal to false because we are going to flap only once. So when we click or when we touch the screen once, we are going to flap once. So did flap is equal to false, and here we are going to use my rigid body. Dot velocity is equal to new vector 2, and for the x-axis we are going to say 0, but for the y-axis we are going to say bounce speed, the variable that we have declared here basically. And here we are going to use that animator, so here we're going to say anim dot set trigger to be our trigger that we typed in the animator, if you remember, and we set the parameter to be flap. So if we go back here in the Unity, select our bird, and in the animator, we see that we have our flap trigger. So that will be, well, the flap animation, and we see that we have an error and we need to go back here. So it's set target, not set target, it will be set trigger. So let me just type it right. So set trigger, and this will trigger that flap animation, and we see that our error, well, has gone away, and this will trigger that flap animation simulating, well, the flap of our bird basically. Now, in order to flap our bird, here we need to create a public void function, so it will be public void, and I will name it flap the bird. So flap the bird like this, and inside of this function we will simply say did flap is equal to true. And basically when we touch that button, because we need to assign this function to that button, and when we touch it we want to flap the bird once. Now we created this public void function because in order to add a function to a button, it needs to be a public void function. So we can go here, and there are two ways that we can add a function to the button. So the first way is to select this button here and click on this plus sign here where it says on click, and then we can drag a game object here. In our case it will be Flappy Bird Blue, and here we can select that function. So here we go BirdScript, and we can, well, select this flap the bird function, which will be executed when we flap our bird. Now in order to test this, I will quickly go back here, and in the awake function we need to set this is alive, so is alive boolean to be equal to true, or otherwise this will not work, because here we are saying if, well, our bird is alive, then we can flap and then we can move basically. We can go back now in our Unity editor and we can run the game, and now when I, well, click here, we see that our bird is flapping and animating that flap. Now I will wrap it up here because this video is getting too long, and in the next video we will see another way how can we add a listener to our button, and how can we program the camera movement and do some other modifications on our bird.